Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Kamola, and I'll be in the background answering all of your technical questions today. Before we begin, I'd like to invite our speakers to say a quick hello. Rebecca.
Hello, everyone.
Margot.
Hi.
Jeff.
Hi.
Nina. Nina, you were muted, sorry.
Hello.
Jackie. Jackie, muted.
Hello, everyone.
Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today for today's webinar, Planning for Autumn's Travel Season. What do we know so far, as part of our COVID-19 Travel and Hospitality webinar series. My name is Rebecca Stone, and I'm a member of McKinsey's Travel, Logistics, and Infrastructure practice. Just as a quick note for reference, this session is being recorded. Next screen, please, Margot. While today's briefing will focus on insights and forecasts as we head towards the fall for the travel industry, which has been deeply impacted by COVID-19, we very much recognize that the coronavirus pandemic is first and foremost a human tragedy, at this point affecting millions of people and creating significant hardship. Like you, we continue to work hard to first and foremost protect the health and safety of our people, our clients, closely following the advice of governments, medical experts, health agencies like the World Health Organization. We're hosting this briefing to share with you our latest thinking in the spirit of helping navigate this difficult time. We recognize that you are understandably concerned about forward implications for travel and tourism, and we hope you find this webinar helpful. We definitely encourage you to submit questions throughout today's session. To do so, go to the Q&A panel on the lower right-hand side of your screen, type your question, select all panelists from the drop-down menu, and click send. To preserve confidentiality, questions will be read by our team and will not be attributed to you. We expect to get several questions throughout the session, and we will hopefully do our best to address each of them. As a quick reminder, if you experience any technical difficulties during the session, please select Producer Webinar from that drop-down list from the Q&A panel and request support. Joining me today are our speakers, Jeff Poole, Senior Vice President of Advocacy at the World Travel and Tourism Council, where he focuses on policy, research, government, and industry affairs on behalf of WTTC members. Margot Constantine, an associate partner with McKinsey out of our Dubai office, focused on tourism globally for the firm. Nainan Chacko, McKinsey senior advisor who has considerable expertise in travel and tourism, having previously been the CEO of Travel Leaders Group, as well as spending many years with Sabre. And finally, Jackie Yu, and also an associate partner with McKinsey, focused on travel, specifically in Asia, out of our Hong Kong office. Now, I'm insights. During today's session, we will share insights from our recent research collaboration with the WTTC, as well as our third Chinese traveler sentiment analysis, specifically around how travelers have responded globally in recent holiday seasons and how travel planners and managers should be planning for the upcoming fall. Now let me turn it over to Jeff Poole to discuss our recent effort and collaboration with the WTTC.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of WTTC to introduce this travel demand recovery dashboard. Now, what Margot and I will go through with you here is actually quite literally what it says. It's a dashboard on travel demand recovery. You will all be aware of the devastating impact that COVID-19 has had on the travel and tourism industry. We talk about it as being unprecedented, but it genuinely is that, both the speed and the depth within which the travel and tourism industry was hit. But it was also unprecedented in the sense we've never had a COVID-19 crisis before. So how and when would the industry recover? Very quickly, therefore, when we were in our crisis management mode, a lot of CEOs of travel and tourism organizations were coming to us saying, where can we find reliable indicators and consistent indicators? Because the sources of information weren't clear, nor consistency or usefulness of the data. So we had the idea to put together a recovery dashboard of the key indicators as we saw them. The concept quite simple, a dashboard with quite a lot of indicators and really looking to see where travelers were searching online, what type of things they were looking for, whether by segment or country or whatever, and looking at other things like flight bookings and bookings in the hospitality sector to see what the future trends were. What were people looking at? How often were they booking? And so on. So this was a fairly simple concept. However, it turned out to be much more complex than we had envisaged in terms of where to find that data and make it consistent and put it together, but also in the technical aspects of the platform itself. So we needed to put forward a really strong team from McKinsey and WTTC of the experts in the industry and the research and the data, but also the technical side of the dashboard. And most importantly, we needed to work with key WTTC members such as Global Rescue, Forward Keys, and STR to obtain what was in essence proprietary data to put into this dashboard. And the other thing was to make sure that this was a completely global approach. Now, the team rose to that challenge, and we have a product now that Margot will present to you. And it's a product that we're very proud of because it really is an excellent tool that is interactive and meets its objectives. And we believe we've had very positive feedback on it from WTTC member organizations. But we've also found it to have actually exceeded our own expectations. For example, as the Senior Vice President for Advocacy, I'm able to go into this dashboard and look at the impact of some government decisions. So, for example, when the UK suddenly imposed restrictions on Spain, we can see in the dashboard the impact that had pretty immediately on people's travel expectations and desires. So this is useful evidence for us to be able to talk to governments about how to go about opening or closing borders or introducing new restrictions. So with that introduction, I'm really delighted to hand over to Margot, who will take you through this and show you what a great tool we have developed.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much. I will briefly take you through the functionalities of the dashboard, an example of some of the insights that we got from the dashboard. I think first, the dashboard is presented in 3 different interactive web screens that are available on WTTC's website. I'll go through each of them in a minute, but just to give you a bit of an overview, there's a first dashboard that focuses on the Google travel searches of 35 countries in the world spread across 6 regions, which looks at both the COVID-19 situation in those countries as well as the travel search behavior. It's then a second dashboard that focuses more on a segment view. How do we see adventure, sun and beach, culture, travel searches evolving globally? And what are some of the key trending keywords within each of those segments that we see in different countries? And then the third dashboard covers all the countries in the world, aggregated at a regional level across 6 different regions, which covers flight booking data, hotel occupancy data, and average daily rates. First, what you will find on the first screen of that dashboard is a regional scorecard of the online travel searches. There are 6 different regions in 35 different countries. For each of those countries, you'll be able to know, are there any travel restrictions in place? There's a fully closed nation, semi-closed. This is from the global rescue data. You will also see how our travel search is evolving over time. The more you see big green happening, the more there's a positive trend in searches. The more red you see, the more declining searches. And you can decide whether you want to look at this for the last 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 6 months, depending on the view that you want to have. On the right-hand side, if you select a specific region or a specific country, you would see the evolution of COVID cases over time on the bottom part. And on the top part, you will see how our travel search is evolving compared to 2019. And what you may decide to do is you may decide to look at this for specific segments. So we've broken this down between adventure, culture, family, sun and beach, and urban travel. And so you'd be able to see how those different segments have evolved compared to each other for each of these countries. On the second screen, what you can do is on the top right-hand corner is select the travel segment that you're interested in. Adventure, culture, family, sun and beach, urban, or just general travel services. And for each of these, what you see is week over week, are people searching that specific theme more or less over time? Which countries are searching it? So on the map at the bottom, if the country is in green, it means that in the last 2 weeks or the last 4 weeks, that's 6 weeks, there's a lot of searches for that specific theme. In red, it means that the searches are dropping. And what you see on the right-hand side, in these little big sort of rectangular boxes, is positively trending keywords and negatively trending keywords. If you then click on a specific country on the map, these keywords will update. Where this is interesting is actually a lot of the trending keywords have to do with destination. So given a dashboard is focused on origin, if you would, for example, click in Germany, you might see whether a certain destination is trending up or trending down from Germany. And then finally, the last part of the dashboard is the actual movement and booking behavior. The top chart covers flight bookings compared to 2019 level for each of the 6 regions. It covers all of the countries in the world, but you will only see the data aggregated at the level of these 6 regions. It covers occupancy rates, and it covers average daily rates. What you already see here is while flights are sort of uniformly extremely down globally, there's a lot more regional variation when it comes to occupancy rates and average daily rates, as well as a lot more volatility. The last one is the Google Mobility Index for those different regions in terms of are people going back to restaurants, parks, entertainment and recreation areas next to where they live, which we believe is a good leading indicator to their future appetite to travel. Now that we've presented this dashboard, what are some of the examples of the insights that we've seen from it? First and foremost, there's of course been a very sharp decline in overall interest in travel and travel searches that we see on Google. However, there's been also a very positive recovery, especially during the summer. Very sharp travel, but good recovery, which was not uniform across all of the countries. Which brings me to the point number 2, which is that you see the recovery varying a lot country by country. On average, countries that have had a good recovery, a good management of COVID during the summer recovered much, much better than the countries that didn't. A big exception there is the United States, which we'll discuss in a minute, where travel searches increased as fast as COVID cases. Point number 3 is when we start looking at this by segment, overall globally, travel searches related to the adventure segment recovered very close to the 2019 level. However, there are some big regional variation. There are some specific countries where urban travel actually comes on top, such as Thailand or Brazil, while for others it's sun and beach. But on average, adventure was a clear winner when it comes to travel searches. The point number 4 is when we look at what was the impact of all of those searches on the actual industry, we definitely see on average globally occupancy rates tracking travel searches very, very, very closely in terms of their variation compared to 2019. So hotels follow very closely travel searches. Europe has the biggest gap between travel searches and hotel bookings. Air travel, however, it remains very, very low globally across all of the regions and is not following travel searches as much. The last point, which is quite surprising, is especially during the summer, while Europe was the fastest recovering in terms of travel searches, it was actually lagging the most in terms of hotel bookings and flight bookings. And we'll discuss in a minute what potential root causes of this behavior could be. Just to illustrate a few of these points, what you see on this chart is travel searches on Google in North America, Asia Pacific, and Europe compared to 2019 over time. So in most of these regions, Q1 was actually performing quite well. Obviously, Asia Pacific starts dropping faster. Europe dropped second. North America took the longest to drop. And what you start seeing is towards the beginning of the summer, some recovery of travel searches. What is interesting is when you look at it at a regional level, all three regions look arrive roughly all at the same point by September. But if you look at it at a country level, you see much, much more variation and volatility. Here is an example for the United Arab Emirates, because this is where I live and I'm based, where you see much, much more volatility. What we see in a lot of countries in the dashboard is that volatility in searches tracks very closely COVID cases. As mentioned before, the US is a very, very big exception where there is absolutely no correlation between those two facts. The second thing that we saw is that countries that had very prolonged lockdowns had a better recovery of travel searches. And I'll explain what I mean by that. When we looked at the travel searches at the beginning of the summer, July 2020, as people were preparing for the summer, what you see in the middle is travel searches compared to 2019 in the countries that had very hard lockdown and got the COVID situation very quickly, by July, quickly or not, but it's by July, very much under control, such as Italy, France, Germany. And there the travel searches almost came back to 2020 level at the beginning of the summer, preparing for the summer vacation. Then you have on the right-hand side, countries that more or less remained closed or semi-closed, where the travel searches remained quite low compared to 2019, even as people were planning for their summer holidays, and that would include countries like New Zealand, South Korea, or Denmark. They were actually performing similar on a travel searches basis compared to countries that had a very difficult situation with continued spread of the virus by that time, which includes countries like US, Brazil, UK, or Russia, where at the beginning of July, the COVID situation was on the increase. And so these were also much, much lower. Another thing that we clearly noticed is the adventure travel segment was recovering the best, especially in Europe. So in pink here, you see the adventure segment, which was almost in August, which is the peak of the summer season. It's almost back at its 2019 level in Europe. Sun and beach, however, performed very poorly in terms of travel searches in Europe at that time, and did relatively better in the US and in Asia. Again, on this topic, you will see lots and lots of country-level variations. And so we definitely encourage you to look at the source markets that you're interested in to understand what is the behavior of your target source markets. Last but not least, what do we see in terms of hotel occupancy and flight bookings? So here what you see in white is the travel searches compared to 2019. And then the dark blue is hotel occupancy rates compared to 2019. You see that those two lines are very, very, very close to each other. In Europe, you have actually an important gap. And the hotel occupancy rate is the least well recovering, which could be either of two things. Either we see a lot of substitution for non-hotel based travel, or the Europeans have spent a lot of time daydreaming about vacations and searching them online for extensive periods of time, but didn't actually travel as much as they thought. Flights, unfortunately, are still pretty much 100% below last year in most of the months, we have net cancellations compared to 2019, and that's consistent across the globe. Except for domestic flights in China, which is a great segue into our next section. The dashboard, WTTC has very generously made the dashboard available for free for everyone to use on their website. Here is the link. We definitely encourage you to visit it and see how this data is evolving over time. It gets updated roughly every 2 to 3 weeks. And as the environment is very volatile, the insights change on an ongoing basis. I'll now invite my colleague Jackie to take us through our latest insights from China.
Thank you very much, Margot, and hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today to present you the latest insights from our most recent China Traveler Sentiment Survey. So I will start with some of the facts to help you understand the latest recovery situation in China, and then followed by some of the key takeaways that we observed in the latest survey results, and then finally conclude by some of the implications that we see might be helpful for the tourism players to consider. So to start with, we see that the Chinese consumers are in general more optimistic than their peers in Asia and also other parts of the world. When we ask the people about their confidence in their country's economy recovery after COVID, in general, Chinese consumers are more optimistic and less pessimistic. So the net optimism is quite high in China. And next page, please. And if we look at the latest recovery pattern or the situations in China, I think these charts conclude nicely and beautifully around the 3 stories or the 3 sides of the travel and logistics recovering in China. Sorry, Margot. Yeah, page 20. So for the sectors that's more related to the online shopping or the e-commerce types of sectors like the express shipments, we actually see a positive growth year on year comparing with the pre-crisis level. And then the second chunk on this chart will be the sectors that are more related to the domestic market, say, for example, domestic hotels, domestic flights, domestic rail. We see a dip at the beginning of the outbreak, but then we see a relatively stable and steady and healthy recovery along the past few months. And for some sectors, they even now close to 90% of the level pre-crisis. But then for the final one, about the sectors, those will be related to the international travel activities, for example, international flights or the cruise passenger numbers, which a majority will be the outbound cruising. They will be still stay muted. And the caveat here is that because of the international travel restrictions, we actually observed some of the substitution effect from the outbound travel spending flowing back to the domestic market. And on the next slide, if we turn to, we see some of the evidence that shows the substitution effect. Say, for example, when we look at the domestic hotel recovery by different tiers, we see that for the luxury and ultra high-end hotel tiers, in terms of the occupancy recovery, is even higher or stronger than the mainstream. So this proved some of the substitution effect from some of the higher end or the middle class segments that they used to spend the money outbound, and now they turn it back to the domestic market and actually fill up some of the domestic upper and hotel demand. And the next page, if we take a deeper look at the different sectors in the travel and tourism sectors in China, for example, for airlines, we see in terms of the capacity, it's relatively back to the 90% level as last year. And in terms of the number of passengers on the plane, it's around 70 to 80% of the level comparing to last year. And then from hotel side, occupancy is around 80% to 90% of the last year's level. And then in terms of the average room rate, it's also around the 80% to 90%, so that the resulting RevPAR is around 70% to 80%. So we see that in general, in terms of the actual activities in China is relatively strong and healthy in terms of the recovery pattern. And these can actually be explained by the consumer confidence, and that's why we have been monitoring the traveler sentiment since the start of the outbreak. So this is actually the third round of the survey that we did at the end of August. And on this slide, you can see that on the blue bars would be the confidence level in terms of safety across the different traveling methods in August. And then the black bars will be the same number that we recorded in May. And interestingly, if you look at from the chart from left to right, some of the key takeaways that you can observe here. In terms of the domestic leisure travel activity, we see a significant increase in August. Right. So, and also for the domestic business travel activities, there will be an even higher increase in the very recent summer season. And these can nicely translate into the actual activities that we see both the domestic business travel activity and the leisure travel activity in the summer season actually picking up quite a lot. But on the right-hand side, the other flip side of the story will be around the outbound travel. Regardless that's leisure or business, people are still thinking the confidence level in terms of safety, they're relatively totally unsafe, right? So that's why people are still don't feel comfortable to go international travel or go outbound. And the next page, in terms of who are these travelers that are coming back domestically and about when they're going to travel again for their next leisure trip. First of all, on the right-hand side about the who, we see that in this round of the survey, almost all the segments came back, right? So 70% of the respondents will expect a leisure trip within the 4 months. And also we see that the elderly and the retired segment actually came back. Comparing with the April results, we see the young and the single segments come back first, and then also the family segments came back in the May survey results, and now we see that even the elderly segment and the retired segments, they actually came back. And in terms of the when, sorry, Margot, maybe. Yeah, so in terms of the when, look at the left-hand side here. The national holiday would be the most peak season traditionally in China, and today is actually the first day of the Golden Week today. So, and we're already seeing the huge demand that's happening in China. For example, 2 weeks ago, when we look at the booking data in China for hotel segments, both the occupancy and also the average room rate is already exceed the level comparing to last year. So the next page around what types of trips that people actually want to go. And in general, it's quite consistent. We observed the same pattern in the April round, May round, and also the August round for the themes around outdoor health and well-being and wellness types of trips, and also the families and kids trips would be some of the mainstream. So that's why we see the foodie trips, the natural scenic sport trips and beach and resort trips actually picking up. And comparing with the number that before the crisis, Chinese travelers might want to go to some of the iconic urban area for some of the sightseeing and also focus quite a lot on the shopping trips, etc. But now we're seeing the behavior is changing quite a little bit, especially under the recovery of the COVID. And next one, in terms of the format, we see the self-guided tours and also the smaller tour groups would still be the mainstream. But interestingly, in the most recent round of the survey, we see the biggest increase or the biggest improvement is actually on the large guided tour groups and the cruise. So basically, we can see that people are more confident to even going out for traveling with the formats that's perceived as more risky in a bigger crowd or with the strangers, that people are getting more confident and comfortable to go under these types of formats. And the next one about where they want to go, right? So in terms of the destinations, this one is quite interesting because we explicitly ask people to have some trade-off and only pick one of the destinations that they would really like to go in the next leisure trip. And here is more about the willingness instead of the feasibility, right? So, and we see that the increase is actually in the outbound destinations overall, meaning that people, after several rounds of going domestic trips in April, in May, in summer, now they're even thinking about if it's possible they want to go outbound, right? So the latent demand for the international is still there, but of course we can see that in the previous slide in terms of the confidence on safety, there will still be quite some gaps there. And the next page, please. And the final takeaway from this survey will be around some of the new behaviors on customer engagement model or in terms of the channel. And even before we talk about the travelers, in general, Chinese consumers are willing to try new things. In the more general consumer survey that we did a few weeks ago, 83% of the Chinese consumer in general, they would like to try the new ways of shopping. And these actually also translate into the travel arena as well, because when we ask from which channels that they actually get inspired in selecting their last travel destinations, some of these new media channels or the new types of information channels pops up, right? So for example, the online video streaming platform, the online short video or live broadcasting platform, or actually search for the KOL or the KOC introducing the destinations is actually becoming more popular in China. So what does all these mean for the travel and tourism companies? We try to conclude the three ideas as a food of thoughts for you to consider. First of all, definitely you need to understand the micro segments of the customer or the traveler, right? So to track the behavior patterns in terms of the order of recovery and understand what actually can move the needle to attract these specific segments will be quite important. And secondly, as we see that some of the opportunities will be within the domestic market. That's still a domestic story. And we see that there will be some emerging destinations that you can also package with the product and the service to capture what we call the substitution effect of these high-end segments could be something to think about. And finally, the acceleration of the new commercial model or the customer engagement model will be something to think about as well. And I will quickly go through each of the points and then we'll pass it to the next session. So for point one, about tracking the behavior pattern, we try to think from three dimensions: the demographics, the proximity of the destination, and also the trip formats that we all have covered in the survey slides just now. And we see this clear order of recovery in each of these dimensions. Say, for example, for the domestic demographic of the travelers, the young and single segments will come back first, followed by the family, and then later on with the elderly or the retired segment, and then expand to basically all the age groups in general. And in terms of the proximity, staycation definitely will be some of the key focus. And also, if you have enough domestic market, then think about domestic markets in the short haul and later for the longer haul, and maybe gradually to think about outbound international. And in terms of the trip formats, starting with self-guided trips that people will stick with their own family, and then maybe expand to a smaller group that they can get on the trip with the direct family and also the friends in a bigger group. And finally, maybe some of the larger groups like the cruise or the large guide tour groups will come back as well. So think about which segments and the patterns and the stage that your market will be, and then think about how to prioritize and do the combination of these recovery patterns. And then second point around the emerging destinations, this is quite fascinating. If you look at the left-hand side of this slide, the black trackers are the top 10 destinations in summer vacation in 2019 in China, and then the blue trackers are the ones in 2020 this year. And you can see a significant and clear shift to the middle and the west part of China, especially for the province that's with a more abundant natural resources. So, for example, in Yunnan, in Sichuan, in Xinjiang. And one other interesting commonality that we see is that these new destinations will traditionally be underdeveloped in terms of the infrastructure of the transportation or the infrastructure of tourism in general. Say, for example, number of hotels or the hotel facilities, maturity, etc. So we see the opportunities on the development of these emerging destinations, which might require a joint effort from the stakeholders like the government and also the different part of the value chain in the tourism field. So this one will be something to think about as the opportunity for the investment. And finally, in terms of the digital marketing transformation or the new ways to engage with the consumers, we see definitely an acceleration that's happening in China. So social media and live broadcasting mass marketing is becoming quite popular, right? So some of the OTAs, they would deploy the KOL, the KOC, or even the management team would do the live broadcasting marketing by themselves. And the result and the effectiveness is actually quite high. And then for some of the heavy asset providers, like the theme parks or the attractions, they're thinking about to innovate the tour experience from offline to online, and then build this omni-channel experience to extend the trip experience even before the travelers physically get into the site. And also, finally, we see an effective pattern by building the ecosystem with some of the tech platforms or the internet giants, say, for example, forming some of the exclusive deal as a traffic portal to draw the traffic and the demand from these internet giants. And we see some of the successful cases doing it in China. And of course, the China ecosystem in terms of the internet and also the tourism ecosystem might be quite different from other part of the world, but we think the concept and the essence of these transformations could be applicable. So finally, let me close this section with just a few ideas. First of all, we have faith that travel will be back, right? So domestically and ultimately internationally. I think historically we see that, and also the evidence in China, we also see that. Of course, it could be a long way, and it could be in very different patterns in different parts of the world, but we have faith that travel will be back, as we see that people still want to travel, and that's a stake with their DNA. And secondly, be prepared to understand the micro segment, to track the behavior, understand what actually can move the needle. And the third one, invest in the customer behavior in the next normal world. Be prepared and ahead of the game by investing and understand the travel consumer behavior in terms of the new product, the new destination, the new channel. And finally, I think to embrace the change and be agile in your organization setup, because the recovery can be quite unpredictable. So how to adjust in time, that will be quite important. So thank you very much for listening today. I will pass it to my next colleague.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Actually, there's a couple of questions on the chat related to China that I'll try to summarize in one question for you before we move on to the next section. I think some of our participants would like to understand how are some of those learnings applicable or different maybe to other markets, especially potentially the US.
Interesting. I think, so as I mentioned, different part of the world might under a very different recovery pattern. I think in general, the China lessons can be more applicable to two types of archetypes in the world, right? So the one with a higher confidence level in terms of the safety, that you can actually think about instead of not only about the safety, but also about pulling back the demand, or even like China now, they're optimizing in terms of the value, right? So how to get more profit for the travel players, that would be one. And secondly, I think the China lessons can also be applied to the markets with a sufficient domestic market, right? So if you have enough domestic market, some of these substitution effects might also also be applied in your market. And so how to think about tailoring some of the new destinations, understand the micro segments, and then be ahead of the game to basically tailor this new consumer behavior will be something to think about. And I think, for example, for the US, I think there will be something that can learn from China, but not all, or of course, right? So on one hand, the safety and the hygiene protocols still need to be there, and maybe some of the innovation in terms of the operating model that will significantly be more important in the US market. But on the other side, if the confidence level is there, so how to trigger the demand in a safe way, and how to also optimize the value with all the lessons that we just shared. So I will pass it to my other colleagues.
Thank you very much, Jackie. We're moving on to our last section. Nina, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Margot. Hello, everybody. So really from this point onwards, what do we glean from these insights? Particularly as Jackie talked about China and Margot sort of talked about the overall trends from the dashboard that's been built in partnership with WTTC. So I wanted to break this out into sort of three broad areas as we think about the autumn season ahead. So from a marketing standpoint, critical to continue efforts to inspire travelers. Obviously, the dynamics of each market around the world, source markets are different, but I think continuing obviously to both use a tone that allows travelers to take the lead as they decide what they're doing with their planning from that search data that Margaret touched on earlier, as they work their way through ultimately regaining that confidence. And as part and parcel of that, particularly the role, I think, for both suppliers and destinations is to continue building that patient demand that ultimately can be harvested once that traveler feels secure enough about the destination, about the processes, about the journey, etc., in terms of taking that particular trip. And I think embedded within all of this is really a great opportunity, particularly on the heels of the challenge that the industry in general had with over-tourism. I think there's an embedded opportunity in all of this, particularly with markets that have, I think, a significant domestic set of destinations, is to help travelers really rediscover, or in some cases discover, I think, those additional destinations that are present within their domestic market itself. And particularly as we saw from the China example, as consumers start to build that confidence in going from local to regional, etc., that allows them to kind of expand their preference in terms of destinations they're looking for. At a product level then, the key to all of this is adapting the products that are available for offer from a leisure standpoint to really what travelers are ultimately looking for. And what's clearly being displayed is a preference for naturally socially distant settings, so the outdoor, so on and so forth, but really in that expanding range of, I think, as their confidence builds from really, if you think about it, distance from wherever they live, sort of emanating from there, local, regional, ultimately rural destinations further and further afield. So the key, I think, for suppliers and destinations is to seize that opportunity to manage that demand and start pushing that demand out to these lesser known domestic areas, and equally into shoulder periods, perhaps periods that weren't historically peak periods, especially as the norms of the working environment have changed fairly significantly with a lot of remote learning and remote schooling. There's an opportunity here to take also advantage of periods of time when travel perhaps wasn't historically as prevalent. And then the last point here is, I think, continuing to shape those product preferences and adapt to traveler preferences. So we've seen clearly some indications where booking windows have shortened significantly across different supplier categories. The notion that flexibility in policies around changes and cancellations are being greatly received by travelers. And also that ability at very short notice to make those changes reflects the uncertainty and the unpredictability in the environment of how essentially the pandemic is going to continue to evolve in different markets and geographies around the world. And ultimately, as part and parcel of this, an interesting factoid is given that there is a constrained level of supply, there hasn't been a lot of indication that there's a great deal of sensitivity around price. So while there might be shifts up and down the spectrum, say in hospitality from luxury to mid-range, ultimately there seems to be a given appetite for customers with respect to consuming products with pricing as it existed even prior to this pandemic. So all to say that so far there hasn't been a great observed need for significant customer incentives on a price standpoint. And then the last category in all of this is really standardization around biosecurity protocols. And the key here is that customers will take and embed confidence in the fact that more and more supply categories will create and be transparent about the standards that they're putting into place, about the protocols, and that helps set customer expectations around essentially what their journey will consist of. And all of this starts to feed back into this whole notion of improving and establishing and increasing that traveler confidence. I think from a supply standpoint, continuing this journey down the path of moving towards contactless through the whole cycle of booking, fulfillment, travel, so on and so forth, again, as a means of driving towards increasing that traveler confidence. And then finally, embracing the fact that there isn't really a steady, predictable path about what's ahead. Certainly when one looks at this notion of different geographies, different destinations around the world, we are dealing with a world of uncertainty, and embracing that uncertainty allows, I think, destinations to figure out how to manage their way through it as, say, hotspots come up. So as an example, for example, when we think about somebody like Germany, who's embraced the fact that rather than do a blanket shutdown, take a little bit of calculated risk in terms of managing how, I think, as hotspots emerge, they deal with that and still maintain this goal of supporting the travel economy. Margot, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. We'll open up further for Q&A, so please feel free to ask us questions in the Q&A bar. There's one more question that we've received that I will direct to you, Nainan. Given some of the changes in travel segments, how would you say destinations and companies that operate in the travel industry can prepare for maybe new types of travel segments that may be emerging from this, especially in the last quarter of the year?
An excellent question, Margot. And I think, again, just to tie back to some of the data and search and trends that you talked about in the WTTC dashboard, I think key to all of that is assessing where some of these trends are moving to for travelers and consumers. So to pick one, for example, this notion of obviously remote working, working from home, remote schooling is really giving rise and supportive of the fact that people can choose to really alter their lifestyles and really not be in their traditional home base. And I think that's very supportive of this notion of a digital nomad lifestyle, perhaps potentially much longer stays that could incorporate quarantine periods in various destinations. Thinking about retirees and their ability to perhaps have a lifestyle that affords them the ability to live really for much longer periods of time in certain destinations. So I think destinations and suppliers can start to think about these shifting boundaries of what consumer preferences were in the past and build products that adapt to these emerging lifestyles, both in terms of capabilities that may allow, for example, for childcare. When one thinks about, family with young kids and they're working and schooling remotely, that becomes an express need. Or, for example, high-speed broadband internet connectivity is clearly going to be a key regardless of what destinations emerge to support this kind of a lifestyle. So I think there's actually a range of opportunities that we start to see the early signs of as these trends continue to evolve. So all behooves everybody to, I think, pay significant attention to both the data in that dashboard and these country-based examples like China that are really leading this recovery.
Thank you very much. I'll move on to the next question. Companies like Marriott have said that leisure travel doesn't typically fall off in the autumn as much as people may expect. Do you get a general sense of how much of a pullback, if at all, there is going to be in leisure travel going into the autumn? I'm happy to take this question. So this is a very, very good question. And I think this is why we're very keen to track travel searches as a good leading indicator for how much people are going to travel in the coming month or so, especially what we've seen now in 2020 is very, very short booking lead times. And so we expect that the travel search lead times are also very much on the short side. And I think the specific context here is in many, many parts of the world where we saw travel recovering a little bit during the summer, there has been a very sharp increase in COVID cases, which was not at all the situation that we saw in July and August. And at the same time, the travel searches are somewhat stabilizing, and we see a little bit less month-on-month volatility. So I would say the jury is out in terms of what numbers we're really going to see. If we look at what has happened in Q2, the increase in COVID cases is not helping, but it could be that that what we see now in the autumn season is a complete decorrelation between COVID cases and travel searches and booking. At least we're very much hoping so for the industry. The next question. Somewhere in the deck, there was a comment that high-end hotels were recovering more favorably. Are we seeing that across most recovering markets or specifically just in China? In the US and UK, which segments of hotels are recovering better? Jackie, is that something that you'd like to take? I'm also happy to jump in.
Yeah, Margot, you can comment on that one.
Great, of course. So what we've seen is in countries that are more economically impacted, that there is a bit of a switch towards value segment. And so that economy and mid-scale has been doing a bit better. China is rather less economically impacted and further ahead in the recovery. And there is a big substitution for this outbound luxury travel to the domestic market. But if you look at the beginning of the crisis, Jackie, if I'm not mistaken, the Chinese luxury segment was performing very poorly. And as the holiday season started coming up, then the luxury travel recovered. In the UK and the US, we're still very far from that on average.
And maybe one observation to add to that, Margot. So I think in the US market, for example, most high-end properties, luxury properties tend to be more concentrated in metro areas. And the shift certainly in the US has been to more rural, outdoor, remote locations. So to the degree there are luxury properties there, they've certainly seen a pickup in demand. But I think it's less a function of that and more a function of geography that is sort of seeing this rise of kind of the mid-tier 3-4 star, seeing a more positive recovery, as you mentioned.
In Europe, we also see a big substitution towards non-hotel-based travel, which hits the extreme numbers. If you take the Middle East, where I'm based, you have a bit like the Chinese situation, lots of high-spending people who are not able to travel out. So the luxury segment is doing relatively better because of the substitution of the outbound luxury spend for domestic. Last question that we'll be taking today. To what extent does business travel have to recover for most hotels and travel providers to stay afloat? Basically, can leisure travel adequately make up that difference? So here, I think it radically depends on the property. So it's not a general statement. You have properties and locations that are completely focused on business travel, others that are completely focused on leisure travel. And then you have some mixed properties. Now, it doesn't mean that these business properties can't reinvent themselves, but it will require reinvention of the model, at least in the short term, until they see the business travel coming back. In China, domestic business travel has come back quite well, but that's the only market where we've seen this happening. What we've seen some business hotels some hotels that were relying very much on business clientele do is switch towards competing with the housing market by offering their rooms as monthly rent, as a substitution to paying a monthly rent to a landlord, and transforming their kitchen in sort of shared cooking hubs, their restaurants and co-working hubs, so that guests can have access to all the typical facilities that you would have if you were living in sort of a regular apartment. But it will require some reinvention of the model. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the session. We'll be sharing this document with all of the people who joined today and the people who registered. And it was really a pleasure to share some of our insights with you again today. And we hope that you're walking away with further thoughts for your business or your destination. Thank you.